come home and meet Mama. That's the greatest invitation, you know. We have a grandma that's out of sight. Will you please come after your speech? Or would you hold the baby? We'd love you to hold the baby. He's brand new and wonderful, and we'd like you to experience him too. Everybody knows that. No one ever sends me money. They always know that the greatest gift for me is a warm abrazo or a kiss or an invitation to come home and have some pasta. And so tonight I really am pleased, more than you know, to be with you. And to get into what we're going to talk about, the first thing I've got to do is strip for action. You know, I only wear these things because they sort of make me feel like I'm respectable. I don't know why I have to feel respectable, but anyway, I feel respectable, and then I take them off, and I stop being respectable, and then we can communicate. I want to tell you an interesting thing that happened. Some of you know that during Valentine's Day, which has just passed, I somehow become a national hero. And it's really a wonderful thing to be associated with love. And so I'm not complaining, but I get calls from all over the country asking for time for rap shows and newspaper interviews, and magazine people come in and interview me. For one day a year, I become a hero. And I love it. It's fine to be associated with Valentine's Day. It makes me sorry, though, that we have to set aside a day to remind everybody to love each other. It's sort of like setting aside Mother's Day. You know, every day should be Mother's Day. Every day should be Sister's Day, Brother's Day, Grandma's Day, Uncle Louie's Day. I mean, I don't know why we have to set aside these times, but I guess it's good occasionally to be reminded. And I get a big kick out of watching people's responses to Valentine's Day. And we have a big shopping center near my house, and I went there to buy a couple of cards for some of my secretaries and so on, and I wanted them to be really special, and I was spending a lot of time there. But I was also watching human behavior, and I saw a man come charging in, you know, to this beautiful stand that was full of little red hearts and all kinds of smiling things and signs that said love and everything. And he started looking through these things like he was going crazy, you know, and he kept saying, damn it. He was buying a heart for his wife. You know, and I said to him while he was going through it, he says, isn't this a hang-up? What do we have to do this for? And I said, well, why do you do it? He said, what do you mean, why do I do it? If I don't do it, she'll kill me. A few minutes later, a very young lady came in, and I smiled at her, and she smiled at me, and I said, Happy Valentine's Day, and we were just having this thing, and she said, you know what I'm doing here? You won't believe it. My boss sent me here to buy a Valentine for his wife. And she said, boy, I tell you, if my husband did that, I'd kill him. Here we were standing among hearts, and we heard about 2 murders in just 5 minutes. And all of a sudden it occurred to me of why I go around talking about choose love and choose life, which is what I want to talk to you about this evening. I know as a teacher, you know that besides all my running all over the country and all the crazy things I do, I'm basically a teacher, and I'm happy to be that more than anything else in the world. And I have learned a long, long time ago that nobody has ever taught anything to anybody. That's an ego trip. I can be the wisest man in the world and tell you all that I know, but if you don't want to know it, it's sensational. You do not learn it. I know that because I'm constantly yelling and screaming at my students, and I know that they have the power to look enthralled. You know, they look at me like, oh man, are you interesting? But nothing's happening. You know, it's going in, it's getting down on the paper, but I know that they're thinking about, now, what'll I wear tonight? And so on and so forth. To just toss out this information is one thing. For learning to go on is a decision that you make. I can't make it for you. So we don't learn this way. We learn most. And Bandura at Stanford, who's doing all the wonderful research now in learning, is telling us again and again, we learn from modeling. We don't learn from being told. We learn from watching, observing, and picking it up. That's the way we learn. It's sort of a discovery process. And then it bothers me because I think we are demanding that our kids learn love, learn responsibility, learn joy of life, And we don't have too many models. We have people screaming over hearts, sending secretaries out to buy their wives Valentines. You know, I don't know how many of you watch, I hope you're not watching too much of other things but public television, but if you watch commercial television, you've probably seen that ad that really bothers me. It's this commercial thing about don't forget your parents on Mother's Day or something like that, and it is a service where all you have to do is call in, and they pick a gift and send it to your parents in Iowa. And then they show these two lovely old people, and the doorbell rings, and they run to the door and pick up this gift that's been picked by some creep. That's not a gift. Better you keep it. I hate to read statistics like these. In a recent mental health survey, only 20% of those people in America who were interviewed said that they enjoyed life and were happy. 20%! 1 out of every 7 of us is going to require psychotherapeutic help before we get to the age of 60. 1 out of every 3 marriages will end in divorce, and they say that before the year 2000, it's going to be 1 out of every other 1 out of every 2. I just learned a statistic that really blew me out. 60 million Valium prescriptions are given every year in the United States. Those of you who don't know what Valium is, good, I'm not going to tell you. It's better that you don't know. But you know, when we are this kind of a model, what do we expect the people in our environment, especially the children that we're working with, to pick up? You know, I don't know how many of you know Fred Moffat, but he is very much involved in education, and he wrote a little thing called How Children Learn. And he says this: thus a child learns by wiggling skills through his fingers and toes into himself, by soaking up habits and attitudes of those around him. Day by day, the child comes to know a little bit more about what you know, to think a little bit more about what you think, to understand your understanding. That which you dream and believe and are, in truth, becomes your children. As you perceive dully or clearly, as you think fuzzily or sharply, as you behave foolishly or wisely, and I love this, as you dream drably or goldenly, you bet. As you bear false witness or tell the truth, thus your child learns. You know, people are always saying, oh, but Buscaglia, you were so lucky growing up in that home that you grew up in. And you know, I smile when they say that. It's true, I was lucky. I had an incredible, wonderful papa and an insane mama. She was outrageous. She always brought joy and music and beauty and understanding into our home. Papa was very serious. Mama balanced him off all the time. She would do things that were outrageous. There were times when he came home and he said, you know, I don't know where we're going to eat the next day. She says, don't worry, we'll find a way to eat. He came home the next day, incredible dinner on the table. What's this? You know, so I sold a little ring. The time for happiness is now. Sit down and eat and shut up. You know, I was learning all this time. I didn't know that this woman was so amazing. No one ever stopped to tell me those things. But I learned pride. You know, we were very, very poor. Some of you understand that, and that isn't everything. All of the money that we have cannot buy what I had, but I remember one very cold day, my mother said, you have to wear a coat. I didn't have a coat. And she insisted that I wear my sister's coat. Well, you know, as a little bambino, that's a trauma. I don't want, I'd rather freeze to death. Shut up. She was a really good non-directive counselor. Put the coat on and be grateful to God that you have a coat to keep you warm. You know, one of those coats with the little fur? And the buttons that were on the wrong side? And so Felice goes to school, you know, and she says, be full of pride. Wear it with pride. There are people that don't have a coat. She didn't succeed. I was embarrassed, but in retrospect, I now understand pride. But those are the way, and those are the things that cause us to become what we are. We don't recognize that we learn in those interactions. They're wonderful. I remember I was a really skinny little boy, and PE was my nightmare of the day. I was so uncoordinated, I never learned how to throw a ball. I had real skinny little pindly legs, you know, and long gangly arms, big eyes, that's all you could see. And I would get in PE class, and, you know, you'd have to dress in those shorts. There were 3 sizes too big because Mama was smart. You'll outgrow them, so get the big ones. So there I was in these great big things with this thing hanging way down around my knees. Disappeared. Just 2 eyeballs in PE class. And so I'm standing there in line with all of these guys, and there's the big macho guy over here. And he is going to be the team leader. And the other big macho guy over here, he's going to be the team leader. And they start choosing. Remember that? I pick you. The big guy walks out there. I pick you. And the line is dwindling. You know, and you begin to pray. And you say, dear God, make somebody pick me. Don't let me be last. Every time last. I remember that was me and a beautiful, incredible, fat Jewish boy. The Dago and the Jew. Always the last 2. And then after you got up there, you know, these guys would be swinging and knocking these balls all over the place and everything. And you'd get up there with the bat and you'd say your little prayer, you know. You'd say, just once, God, let me connect. Right out of the field. Never. But, you know, what was I learning about myself? I was learning that I was inadequate, that I couldn't do those things. You know, I was almost 17 years old before somebody said to me, you can throw a ball. What's the matter with you? It's an easy skill. Let me show you how to do it. And I wondered, why didn't they do that back then? So many years of agony and despair, abhorring my body. I had a neat body. It was just skinny. Now I have a neat body. It's just fat. I love it. But, you know, we teach our kids every day without knowing that we're doing it. I hear mamas standing in supermarkets with the little kid there holding on to her finger. And she's saying, now this is the dumb one. You know, now his sister, she's the smart one, but he's the dumb one. It's all right because he's cute. Well, you know, what is he learning? Well, he's learning that he's cute, but he's also learning that he's dumb. I work with kids all the time. You know that that's my life. And again I hear, I can't do that. I'm dumb. And I say, who told you you're dumb? My teacher? Ooh. I'd like to get hold of her. I'd like to introduce her to my favorite teacher of all time, whom I always write about and everything. If you ever find her anywhere, tell me. I'll fly to Nepal to give her a hug. Marvelous Miss Hunt. For her, nobody was ever dumb. Everyone had a uniqueness that was totally theirs. And she knew it because she weighed 300 pounds. All unique, all caring, all loving, all encompassing. Oh, when Miss Hunt hugged you and you disappeared in her, you would learn anything for her, anytime. And so, you know, that's the sad part about it, is that we are every day being models for children. And the question I keep asking is, what kind of a model are you? And how can we demand that children become lovers when they don't see too many of them? How can we demand that they be responsible and caring and concerned when they have no models for concern and caring and love? And what they learn is what they're going to practice. And it's what we're going to get because it's going to be part of us year after year after year. So I thought tonight I would love to talk to you about some of the things that we may want to teach children. And in order to do that, we must forget this and say, I want to be the model. I want to teach life. I'm so amazed when I read statistics like only 20% of the population in America would choose life. And so many people who say to me again and again, I didn't ask to be born. What a pity, when there's so much. I can't ever take anything for granted. I go crazy. I live so intensely because there's so much to know and to see and to do and to taste and to chew, especially to chew. Does it ever, I'll show you how naive I really am. Has it ever occurred to you, aren't you amazed that carrots taste like carrots and radishes taste like radishes? And that if we mix them together and make some kind of a goulash, we can get a third taste? I'm astounded by things like that. I was in Albany recently, and I'd come from like 82 degrees into minus 15. And everyone kept saying, oh, you poor thing. I said, what are you talking about? Look, it's snowing and there's ice on the ground, and I don't see this all the time. I want to celebrate the weather. You know, then they were convinced it's that kooky Buscaglia again. You know, but like I always love to say, being called kooky Buscaglia means I have a lot of leeway for behavior. And that means I can be kooky and happy, and you can be so damn smart and miserable. But you know, one of the first things that we must teach children, and we can't teach it unless we believe it ourselves, is that each of you is a holy thing. I'm awed when I look at an audience or meet people. The gold mine of you. The very fact that I look at you and see all these incredible faces, sparkling eyes and red hair and yellow hair and brown hair and no hair. And just to look at an audience the size of this one and to say that there are no two of you alike is awesome. And you know what that tells me? It tells me that you are different for a reason. It isn't an accident. There aren't any accidents. Each of you has something to do on the face of this globe, and each of you has something to say. Get in touch with it and do it. And then you'll know what life is all about. And we need to tell children early that this is so. You know, I remember being very moved by a book I read many, many years ago in a comparative lit class. Some of you may have read it, some of you may have not. But Dostoevsky's The Idiot. And in it there is this marvelous prince who is very naive, and he believes that everybody is full of love, and he tries to share all of his goodness, and he has epileptic seizures. And every time he has an epileptic seizure, after the seizure, he gains an enormous insight. Everything just sort of fits together for him. And toward the end of the book, when things are beginning to really scramble in his mind, he has an epileptic seizure, and when he comes out of it, he's weeping bitterly, and he says, why don't we tell the children? You know, why do we protect children from life? It's no wonder that we're afraid to live. It's because most of us are born in walled rose gardens. And we're not told what life really is. We're not told that life is joy and wonder and magic and even rapture if you can get involved enough. We're not told that life is also pain, misery, despair, unhappiness, and tears. But I don't know about you, I don't want to miss any of it. I want to embrace life, and I want to find out what it's all about. I wouldn't want to go through life without knowing what it is to cry. That's why I have lacrimal ducts. If I wasn't meant to cry, I wouldn't have them. It's all right to cry a little bit. I always find the tears clear my eyes. They save a lot of money. I don't need Murine. But you know, so many times we treat each other as if we're not even there. We have no worth at all. I love the work of Martin Buber, and especially his concept of I and thou. He says each of us is a thou. And when we're interacting with each other, we must interact as if we are holy things. Because indeed we are, special and unique. So when I'm interacting with you, you are a thou. But he says so often we interact with each other on the basis of I and it. Sometimes don't you feel incredible about being treated like an it? I am never reticent to shout out, scream it, I'm not an it. I'm me. I'm Felice Leonardo Buscaglia, one of a kind. Don't look through me. I have a sense of dignity. But you know, as long as we deal with people as I and thou, says Buber, we have dialogue. When we treat people as I and it becomes a monologue. I don't want to talk to myself. I want to talk with you. And I want you to talk with me. We have dignity. And children have to learn that, and they have to learn it early. And they also have to learn that they don't find themselves by looking outside of themselves. They have to look inside. It's not an easy trip, the trip of finding your uniqueness to share with others. Because all of your life you're told by others who you are. Has it ever occurred to you that you are not really you? Most of you are what people have told you you are. And maybe some of you have been wise enough to get hooked on the fact that they meant well, but that it may not be congruent with what you really are because you feel uncomfortable with the role that's thrown on you. And so you smash it down. And you say, I'm going to try to find who I am. And if you do, it's going to be your biggest challenge. There's going to be no peace. But it's also a proof positive you will never be bored. Self-discovery is like all discovery. It's full of wonder. But you've got to get inside. I love the Sufi story about the mullah who was out in the street on his hands and knees and touching the ground, you know, and a friend of his came by and said, Mullah, what are you doing in the street on your hands and knees? And he said, I'm hunting for my house key. I lost my house key. And he said, oh, show me about where you lost it and I'll get down on my hands and knees and help you. He said, oh, I lost it in the house. He said, then what the hell are you doing out here looking for it? He says, oh, it's lighter here. And you know, most of us look for ourselves out here in the light. You're not going to find it. You're going to have to get down on your hands and knees inside where it's dark and spooky and discover all those wonderful things about you. And it is unlimited. No one has ever been able to find a limit to human potential. So you are far more than you are actualized. And you can go on forever and forever and forever. People like Einstein, who decried the fact at the point of death that so little of him had been realized. It's true of all of us. We don't have to be an Einstein. But knowing that you're limitless is your greatest challenge. Find out all of that wonder of you and develop it and stand up proudly. And don't be afraid to fail. It's all right. You don't have to be perfect. You know, somebody was very nice before I came out here and said, be careful, there's a cable there. And there are 2 steps, and you're likely to trip. And I said, wouldn't that be fun if I walked out in all my glory and fell flat on my... You know, then if there was anybody in the audience that thought I was something special, they'd find out differently. I'm just very happy to be a human person like me. I don't have to be perfect. And then I think we need to teach children the importance of others. And that they cannot grow in this world without taking in others. And the more worlds that they take in, these unique worlds, the more they can become. We need to teach them to trust others again, because we're all frightened to death of each other. We're building higher and higher walls, longer and longer bridges. Tear them down. Every day I see how we're distrusting, and it hurts. I live on a freeway in Los Angeles that was the first freeway built in the city, so it really isn't a freeway. There aren't any on-ramps. You're just on. And try to get off with someone on your tail going 55 miles an hour. It's tricky. And every day I know this may be the end. And it's really funny, though. I truly enjoy it. It shows you, in this sense, I'm there on this little thing. There's a fence, and you're on, you know, and so you're looking over your shoulder, and all the cars are coming. And everybody's determined they're not going to stop for anybody. You know, and so you get this pleading expression, won't somebody stop? And a roar, 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 you know. Finally, you see a place, and you say, here goes, roar. You get on, you hear, behind you, and then they get really angry. How dare you get on this freeway? And then they're determined, they move and maneuver to get around so they can be in front of you again. You know, I say, please. Now they're one car ahead of me. Big deal. You know, so when I get to the on-ramp, I remember. And so I'm determined I'm going to let people on. The guy behind me hates me. And so I'm telling people, go on, go on. And they're looking at me frantic. You mean it? You mean it? Yes, I mean it. Get on. They almost kill me. And finally they get on, and then they get this big grin on their face. Somebody let me on. You know, that's really sad. It's really funny, but it's really sad. All of these crazy ways in which we're misguided about people in interaction. And it's sad. We've got to learn to trust again, to believe again. And of course it's a risk. But everything's a risk. We'll talk about risk later on. But we need, again, to begin to go beyond just being. We've got to get in touch with being human. And there's a difference. You know, there's a wonderful story that Buddhists tell that I just love about an ant in a rain barrel and different attitudes about this ant. And they say the first person goes in and he looks in the rain barrel and he sees an ant. And he says to this ant, what are you doing in my rain barrel? And he goes, yuck, no ant. Selfishness. The next person comes and looks in. And he sees the ant there and he says, you know, it's a hot day here, even for ants, and you're not hurting anything. Go ahead and sit in my rain barrel. Tolerance. And the third person comes and doesn't think about being tolerant or anger. He sees the ant in the rain barrel and spontaneously feeds it a handful of sugar. That's love. When you get to the point that you don't have to analyze it anymore, you've got it made. The spontaneous reaction. Somebody's on the road and they need me. I stop. Someone needs to get on the freeway. I go. Someone's crying. And I say, can I help? Somebody said to me at an interview this afternoon, but what about these, when you go to people and you say something to them and they tell you, you know, mind your own business, and you're likely to get that. Well, you don't love to be loved in return. You love to love. You do it because it's natural to reach in and give this ant some sugar. And what have you lost? And also, so many people who have potential are so afraid to let you see what they are. So much beauty is lost because you're afraid. I found a beautiful little thing written by Igmar Gustafsson, which is called Locked In. And I really love this because it says what we're talking about. He says, all my life I lived in a coconut. Isn't that a beautiful place to live? It was cramped and dark, especially in the morning when I had to shave. But what pained me most was that I had no way to get in touch with the outside world. If no one out there happened to find the coconut and was nice enough to crack it open, then I was doomed to live my life in a coconut and maybe even die there. And this happens so often. I died in my coconut. A couple of years later, they found the coconut, they cracked it open, and they found me shrunk and crumpled inside. Oh, what a shame, they said. If we'd only found him earlier, then maybe we could have saved him. Maybe there are more locked in like that. Let's go and look, they said, and they started knocking to pieces every coconut within reach. No use, meaningless, a waste of time. A person who chooses to live in a coconut must be a nut in a million. But they didn't know that I have a brother-in-law who lives in an acorn. That's scary. Get out of your coconuts. Get out of your acorns. You have a great responsibility to be what you are. It's your greatest challenge. And then I think it's important to tell children about the continuity of life. You know, what really bothers me also is that we live in a stratified society. If you think about it, little children are kept together, adolescents are kept together, young marrieds are together, and if you don't happen to be married, you lose your best friends. Old people, for goodness sakes, are kept together. And where does a kid learn that life is not a thing? It's continuity. I was so lucky as a kid because my house was always full of people. Grandmas and grandpas and children who had been newly born and pregnant ladies and newly marrieds. I could tell you stories about that. All in the same house. And we learned early what it meant, that life is a continual process and not stratified. We saw old people, and we knew that someday we would have the privilege too. We saw people dying, and we began to appreciate life. But when you don't see it, you don't know that it's there, and you're scared to death of it. Most of us are horrified about death. We don't know how to die with dignity. If you have lived with dignity, you'll die with dignity. You don't have to worry about it. One of the most fascinating letters I got in the last year was from a woman who, really, it was page after page after page about the fact that she was dying and only had 3 or 4 months to live. And every other word was I and me, but I could sense that she was a very feeling and beautiful person. She just didn't know how to handle death. And so I took a gamble, and I answered her and said, you know, instead of sitting around waiting to die, take full advantage over these few days, the few months that you still have, and live. See what happens if you do something. Go to Children's Hospital. In Children's Hospital, there was a ward of not people your age who are dying, but little children who are dying. Go work with the children. Thank goodness she did. And the wonder of wonders is that the children taught her how to die. The minute she walked in, little kids went up to her and said, are you going to die too? No adult was ever daring enough to say such a thing. She was not only dying, but she was dying of loneliness. One child said, I don't know why. She said, yes, I am. And she said, are you afraid? She said, yes. Why are you afraid? You're going to go see God. Isn't that interesting? That so many of us say that when we die, we're going to go see God, and yet we scream and yell in horror when death comes. That's a very interesting dynamic that was worthy of study. One little girl said, "Will you bring your doll?" She's still alive, and she's still working. And I don't think she's too worried about when it's going to come. There's still something to do. You know, age has nothing to do with becoming senile. It's feeling that you have no more options that makes you senile. As long as you can live right through death. But children have to have some practice with this. They have to see it. We hide them from funerals. We don't let them see bodies. We don't give them answers when they say, "What happened to my dog? What happened to Grandma? She went away on a trip." Well, you know, little kids are going to learn what you teach them. And people that have done studies on children and their attitudes about death have found an interesting thing, that they pick up the attitude of their parents, and if their parents are scared to death of it, so are they. And that's no pun intended. But age has nothing to do with it. It's still an ongoing process. I found some of the most incredible things. Galileo published his last book at the age of 74. Michelangelo was 71 when he was appointed supervising architect of St. Peter's Church. Grandma Moses didn't even start painting until she was 76. Duke Ellington was passed over by the Pulitzer Prize Advisory Committee when he was 66 years old. And his response to them was, "Well, God doesn't want me to be too famous too early." Pablo Casals played a concert at the White House when he was 85, and wonderful, wonderful Susan B. Anthony was still the head of the suffragettes at 80, and she went to prison at 52. Isn't that glorious? Some of us will never know the wonder of going to jail. And George Bernard Shaw, that incredible man, fractured his leg at 96, and do you know how he did it? He fell out of a tree that he was pruning. Age is up here. But you know, we need to know that. We need to see it. We need to have some kind of a concept of it. And then another thing that's essential, and that is that children learn that they have choice. And they will only believe that they have choice if you show them that the greater the number of alternatives in your life, the freer you are. And that those people that commit suicide, for instance, are those people who had the narrowest aspect of life, because they had no choices. Every year at the university, really during final examinations, people attempt committing suicide. There are always beautiful young ladies and young men who slit their wrists because John said that he was going to call them at 4 o'clock, and they didn't call. Can you believe having so little self-concept that because John didn't call or Frank didn't send you a Valentine, you're willing to give up your life? I always say to my students, for goodness sakes, what other things? Certainly, suicide is a viable alternative. But what else could she have done? And I say, be creative. You know, if John didn't call her, besides killing herself, you know, which is a pretty final alternative, what else could she have done? You know, help me. What could she have done? Call him and say, "What the hell did you do? Break your finger?" You know, you have as much right to that as anybody else. You don't have to sit home and snivel because he didn't call you. And there are many other things that she could have done. What else could she have done? Call somebody else. Call Peter. She could make a pizza. She could have a party. She could make Toll House cookies and go out on the street and pass them out. She could take a cold shower. You know, people are always saying, one of the reasons that we like to accumulate and amass wealth is because it gives you greater alternatives. That's insane. If you don't have the alternatives now, you can have all the money in the world and still not have alternatives. You'll just do it faster. Quicker suicides. I remember also when we were little, the big thing we did every week, and we always anticipated it, is we would get into an old Chevrolet, and gasoline at that time was like 15 cents a gallon. And we'd all pile in. If you can imagine, 11 people in a Chevrolet. And the top of it was loaded down with all kinds of wonder, because Mama, in all of her splendor, loved to be comfortable. And we would go to the beach. We would go to Long Beach. It would take us almost 2 hours to get there. We sang all the way. We'd do all the operas. You know, Mama was a singer, and she taught us. So one time we'd sing La Bohème. The next time we'd do La Traviata. You know, and as we passed truck drivers and so on, this crazy family with this umbrella and these chairs and boxes, you know, Mama was never satisfied with sandwiches. We cooked spaghetti at the beach. Can you believe it? Antipasto. You know, people would watch us in awe. We'd arrive at the beach, and it would take us like 2 hours to get everything off. Mama would check the wind. Now put the umbrella here and put the thing here. Put the chair right there facing the sun, you know. Then we get all set. Then we go in and get all wet and so on and so forth. And then we change. Oh, I remember that wondrous time. And we didn't have anything. And all these people around us that had so much were looking at us and wondering, who are those freaks? We had alternatives. We had choices. We believed in our naive way, perhaps. But what difference does it make if you're naive and stupid? If you're living and alive? But I don't think we were so stupid. It was fun. I remember once we wanted to take Papa to Hawaii before he died. We knew he was going to die. And we found out that there was a fare on an airplane that was really cheap. They used to have those fares where they don't even look at you, you know, let alone feed you. They just stash you back in the back of the plane. And we didn't care. It was all right. We went through the first class, and we went down to the back, and you were allowed to buy your own box lunch. You remember that. Don't be so sophisticated. You didn't always have all that you have. And Papa said, so what? We'll cook our own dinner. Oh, you know, I always remember what we had even, because it was so outrageous. We sat there and we put down my sister and I and my niece, and so we had a whole row. And Papa, you know, and he opened up the box, and he had done rosemary garlic chicken. First class was salivating 80 rows away. I remember the hostess kept coming back saying, what do you have there? You know, he had marinated mushrooms. Oh, it was outrageous. Such a dinner. Nobody ate so good on that flight. And we shared with everybody. Someone would turn around and look at us sort of, you know, like, ooh. You'd say, have a piece of chicken. You have choice. You can select joy over despair. You can select happiness over tears. You can select action over apathy. You can select growth over stagnation. You can select you, and you can select life. And it's time that people tell you you're not at the mercy of forces greater than yourself. You indeed are the greatest force for you. Now, you can't do it for me, but you can do it for you. I was always amazed at the work of Viktor Frankl. Many of you know it. A beautiful thing that he did in Man's Search for Meaning. He said this, the experiences of camp life, he was talking about being in a concentration camp, and if any man should have had trouble living through this, he should have. He was a neurologist. He had grown up in a very wealthy Viennese family. He had everything all of his life. And all of a sudden he was put in a situation where you think there aren't very many viable alternatives. Listen to what he says. The experiences of camp life show that man does have a choice of action. There are enough examples, often of a heroic nature, which prove that apathy can be overcome and irritability of the worst kind suppressed. We who lived in concentration camps can remember those who walked through the huts to comfort others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offered sufficient proof that everything can be taken from us but one thing, the last of the greatest of human freedoms, the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way of life. You have that. You know, people say, oh, Buscaglia, you are so naive. You say people can select joy. Try it. The next time you're in a situation where you can find yourself screaming at someone, try smiling. It's amazing. You know, some of you have seen that show where I talk about the man at the airport that was screaming at everybody that he had to get out of that airport, even though there was a blizzard and it was impossible. And I said, why not? There was a little woman there who had become a kindergarten teacher, and she collected up all the children and relieved the mothers to go have something to eat. That's the kind of choice you can make. And I said, why do you make the screaming choice that only reflects on you and gives you bleeding ulcers instead of making other people happy? And this man said he had never thought about that before, amazingly enough. But he talked to me about this in Albany and said he was in Chicago, same place where this happened. That's a wonderful place to get stalled in an airport. It's bound to happen if you go through Chicago enough times. And he said that they told him that they would have to take him to where he was going by bus. There was no possible way of getting out of the airport that night. And there were two women in wheelchairs. They didn't even know each other, and there was one on one side, one on the other. And he said, I thought of Buscaglia, who said to me at that airport, well, don't just sit there, do something. That was really Mama speaking. And he said he walked over to these two women, and he said, are you going where I'm going? And they said, yes. And he said, what about your luggage? And they said, well, we can't get out of the wheelchair, and there's no attendant to... He said, I'll take care of you. And he went over and got their bags and put them on the bus and helped them on the bus. He said, I never had such a good time in my life. It was a beautiful, joyous experience. A choice. I know that I'm probably, they told me to keep track of time, and I've lost track completely. I'm sure this is going to be the longest television show in captivity. But anyway, I have to talk to you or at least a few moments on risk, because risk is so nice. And you will, once you begin to become hooked on risk, your whole life changes. But change and growth takes place only when you're willing to risk and experiment with your own life. You're never sure of anything. Everything's a risk. I remember many years ago, I sold everything that I had, much against everybody's advice. I wanted to go around the world. I wanted to hear a crystal clear temple bell in Nepal. I wanted to sit in a rice paddy in Thailand and talk to people, or at least hug them. And I did. I sold my insurance policy, my house, my car, everything that I owned, and I went. People said, oh my goodness, you gave up your job. You're never going to find another job. You're going to starve when you come home. I came home with like 10 cents. But so much more important were the things that I learned. I learned about attitudes like in Bangkok, Ma Pen Lai. Wonderful attitude. I heard people saying Ma Pen Lai, Ma Pen Lai, Ma Pen Lai all over the place. I wondered, what's this Ma Pen Lai stuff? And finally, when I got acquainted with some Thai people, I said, you know, there's a phrase I keep hearing in the marketplace, in the airports, in the museums, on the canals, on the rivers. Ma Pen Lai, what does it mean? And they sort of smiled and they said, "It means it's all right. It doesn't matter." All of a sudden it dawned on me, my goodness, no wonder they're called the land of smiles. If so many people can say it's all right, it doesn't matter. And then I thought about our culture, where everything matters. What do you mean it doesn't matter? If you think it doesn't matter, it's because you're frivolous. It doesn't matter. The world will go on without you. "90% of what we worry about doesn't happen anyway." And we worry and we worry and we worry, and then we worry about worrying. Every time I speak, I risk. I go to people always like this. You know me. I don't say, "How do you do?" Goodness, I'm one of those crazy people that risked hugging the dean. No one hugs the dean. The dean sits behind a desk that's a mile long and 2 miles wide, and you sit on the other side and you say, "Yes, dean, yes, dean, yes, dean." That's what you do with a dean. You don't hug him. Well, I was sitting there one day and he said the nicest things. He was saying all kinds of really nice things. I thought, what a sweetie. You know, I bet he'd love to be hugged. And so I just got up and I said, "Dean, that's beautiful." And I charged at him. He's sitting in a swivel chair. He goes, "Ah!" So I throw my arms around him and I hug him, much to the horror of my colleagues. My God, he's crazier than we thought. Well, you know, I'm always consistent, and every time I saw the dean, I'd say, "Hi, Dean," and I'd hug him, and I knew he liked it because later on he started cuddling. No one's too big for a hug. Everybody wants a hug. Everybody needs a hug. Changes your metabolism. I want to read you this, and then I promise to close. But it says this: "To laugh is to risk appearing the fool." Well, so what? Fools have a lot of fun. To weep is to risk being called sentimental. Of course I'm sentimental. I love it. To reach out to another is to risk involvement. Who's risking involvement? I want to be involved. To expose feelings is to risk showing your true self. What else do I have to show? To place your ideas and your dreams before the crowd is to risk being called naive. Oh, I'm called worse things than that. To love is to risk not being loved in return. I don't love to be loved in return. To live is to risk dying. I'm ready for it. Don't you dare shed one tear if you hear that Buscaglia blew up in the air. Drop dead with enthusiasm. To hope is to risk despair, and to try is to risk failure. But risks must be taken, because the greatest risk in life is to risk nothing. The person who risks nothing, does nothing, has nothing, is nothing, and becomes nothing. He may avoid suffering and sorrow, but he simply cannot learn and feel and change and grow and love and live. Chained by his certitudes, he's a slave. He's forfeited his freedom. Only the person who risks is truly free. Try it and see what happens. You know, I dearly love the challenge that is presented all over India. When you're traveling through India, you will see everybody as they meet each other and leave each other. They put their hands together like this and they say, "Namaste." Let me tell you what that means. It means, I honor the place in you where the entire universe resides. I honor the place in you where lies your love and your light and your truth and your uniqueness and your peace. I honor the place in you where, if you are in that place in you and I am in that place in me, there is only one of us. Namaste. Thank you. You better stop or I won't be able to speak. You know, someone asked me today, doesn't it make you feel humble and overwhelmed that 10,400 glorious people are going to be spending an evening with you? And I said, you bet it makes me feel humble, but more than that, it excites me beyond belief. I'm just about ready to go into orbit. I don't know about you. But if you see me levitate, join me. You know, it'll be great up there. We've got lots of room to move around in. But the thing that most of all it reminds me of is that I know for sure, again, I've had it reassured, that love is alive and well and living in Chicago. I came well equipped, and this happens first. And then we're ready to go. You know, the most amazing things happen to me in this city all the time. There's something about my vibrations and Chicago's vibrations that just fit together like magic. And every time I come to Chicago, I leave with 1,000 stories to tell. And last time when I was here in October, I was on the Donahue show, and after the show was over, I love walking down Michigan Avenue. There's something stimulating about that street, all those vibrations and the taxi cabs and the people. And I was walking along, and all at once I heard the screeching of tires, you know, and like what we all do, I had an instantaneous response. I turned around to look, and I noticed that a taxi cab had stopped, and a man had thrown open the door, the driver of the taxi, and he said, "Buscaglia! What the hell are you doing in Chicago?" You know, I sort of backed away, and he comes rushing toward me, leaving his taxi there with the passengers inside, you know, and he says, "Oh, I've got to have my hug." So we're out on the sidewalk there hugging, and then he says, "You know, my wife isn't going to believe this. She isn't going to believe it at all." He said, "Do you mind if I take a picture?" And, you know, in the meantime, traffic is backing up, everybody's honking, and he nonchalantly walks in, pulls out a camera, and then gets one of his passengers to take the picture of us together. It was fantastic. And I've been using that story all year because it's wonderful, because you know how I love to collect stories about a name. Didn't matter, what's the difference if he called me Buscaglia if there was so much love, you know? I've been doing a wonderful thing since I saw you last. For the last 4 years, I have been accumulating wonderful material on loving relationships for a new book. And I'm interested in asking people, what is it about your relationships that keep them growing and keep them loving and keep them stimulating, and what makes them last? And then I want to ask people, what destroys them? Because it really bothers me that so many of us are lonely and we don't know how to maintain a relationship. It's you know, if we wanted to learn any skill in the world, we'd go out and we'd study it diligently. We wanted to learn how to use a computer, but all of us think that we are perfect lovers, and therefore we really don't have much to do in terms of forming a relationship. We see this beautiful person across a crowded room and we say, "You." And you live happily ever after. You know, the sad part about it is that that's a beautiful myth, but it doesn't work. The magical thing is that it works for so many of us. And so I sent out 1,000 questionnaires to people who had maintained a loving relationship for something like 20, 30, 40 years. And I asked them, what was it? What did you do? Because I'd love to share it with people. Everyone is so hungry to know how to maintain these things. And you know, I received 600 responses, which is statistically unheard of, and they were filled out. They had things in the margin and pictures on the back and diagrams to show, you know, it was the most beautiful thing to see. And I realized that all of these people were beautiful lovers. And I go all over the country and I meet incredible people who are beautiful lovers. And then I get about 1,000 letters a month from beautiful lovers. And you know, the good news is that our country is full of beautiful lovers. But the bad news is that it's probably the best kept secret in the world. You know, I'm always asking, where are you? Why aren't you showing yourself? When I appear in public, inevitably, if I'm on a talk show or something, somebody has got to say, this is Dr. Buscaglia. He has a PhD. You know, that sort of makes it respectable that I'm there talking about love. who needs a PhD to love? Mama had a 5th grade education. She was the biggest, most wondrous lover I've ever known. All 200 pounds of her. She was gorgeous, and she didn't need a PhD, but it was respectable as far as she was concerned. It doesn't seem quite respectable in terms of our own culture. Every time I'm interviewed, people say to me, "You're advocating loving everyone." And it seems to me that that is unrealistic. And my answer to them is, well, whom would you suggest that I discard? And for what reason? I really would like an answer to that question. How can I help but love you? You're me. The interesting thing, I was reading a review of a biography of the wonderful author William Saroyan. Some of you know him, but he was so fantastic because all of his books dealt with people like you and me, the poor and the struggling and the lonely and the despairing and the out of work and so on and so on. Beautiful stuff, showing you how human love can overcome all of these things. And this reviewer actually said, so much goodness and kindness just doesn't work these days. Putting the book down. Gordon Allport, wonderful psychologist, calls this a tenderness taboo. Isn't that interesting? A taboo against being tender. And really, if you love, you're considered naive. If you're happy, you're considered frivolous and simple. Think about it. When you hear people having a good time, you think they either must be drunk or worthless. If you're generous, you're considered suspect. Everybody's saying, what's in it for him? What's he doing? Why is he giving that away? We're expecting something back. If you're forgiving, you're considered weak. And if you're trusting, you're considered a fool. Well, if all of these wonderful values are put down in our culture, then where are kids going to learn? So it's about time that we start becoming militant as lovers. I just, about a year or so ago, I found a young lady, a beautiful young lady, cribbing on an exam. She had everything all written out in front of her, and I didn't want to make a big fuss about it, but I wrote a little note and I put it on her desk. I said, "See me after class." And when everyone had left, I sat down with her and I said, it's not that big a deal. What are you doing this for? And you know what she said to me? "So what? I don't care. What's all the fuss?" Dio mio. What's all the fuss? You know that I make it mandatory that everybody in my classes get out of themselves and get into other people. Go out and do something for someone. You begin to find out who you are when you are selfless. And I get comments like, "Why should I help others? God helps those that help themselves." Ooh. The wonderful psychologist Piaget did an incredible study with little children, and this is very frightening. He told them a story, and he said 2 little boys did something really, really bad. And Mama came in, and she said, "Which one did this?" And one of them accused the other, and the other accused the other. And she believed the elder son, and so she spanked the kid. And then he asked these children, who was wrong? You know what they said? The one that got caught. That's very frightening for me. But I'm still very optimistic about the future. Kenneth Galbraith says a wonderful thing. He says, pessimism in our time is infinitely more respectable than optimism. The man who sees the decline in juvenile delinquency is a negligent, a fool, and a foolish fellow. The man who foresees catastrophe, oh goodness, has the gift of insight which will assure that he will become a famous radio commentator, the editor of Time magazine, or go to Congress. When I was in Chicago a couple of years ago and was interviewed by John Calloway, that marvelous man, and he has a great way of getting into the closets where you keep your skeletons. There's no way in which you can hide anything from John. He does it nicely, he does it gently, but he gets in there, and there you are exposed, on national television. And he asked me a question that I had never thought about before. He said, you know, Buscaglia, you feel so passionately about people caring about each other, about people coming close together. Why aren't you more political? And I thought about, John, you want me to run for president? Boy, I'll tell you, if that happened, I'd run so fast. But it was a very interesting thing. And so, coming back to Chicago tonight, I decided to call this talk The Politics of Love. And I'm advocating that love be the candidate, and that we be the people who get it all started and see what we can do. You know, if 10,000 people tomorrow make life more beautiful for 10,000 other people, just one other person, we could turn this city around. Get on the phone, write a note. Really do something concrete that's going to make a difference, and then see what happens. Let me know. It'll be really exciting. But we've got to start reinforcing it. So I'm starting by saying, lovers, get out of the closet. Let people know that you're there. Let them see you. Run the risk of being seen as crazy, because the minute you start behaving lovingly, people are going to look at you like you really are weird. We have a home for the aging very near our home, and I love to go there and talk to the people because there's so much to know and see. And so many people there are seen as crazy because they do really nice things. There's one woman who is about as tall as I am, very slim, very beautiful. Her hair is pulled back, and she's always very clean, and we call her the Pigeon Woman. And we call her the Pigeon Woman because she sees to it that every single pigeon in that neighborhood eats a gourmet meal at least once a day. And you know, the neighbors go crazy because they don't like the pigeons. You know, they're letting their little blasphemies all over the place. And people talk about it eating away the paint and so on and so forth. But you know, pigeons have got to live too. And this woman has a real sense of that. And it's wonderful to watch her early in the morning because I'm sure that she devours everybody's leftover toast and everything and puts them in her little apron. And she's been told, because the neighbors have complained, that she is not to feed the poor pigeons. But she creeps out, and you see her morning after morning, and she walks out there, and all the pigeons are waiting, you know. Burr, burr, burr. Oh, here she comes, kids. She walks out there, and they just come from miles around, just huge. And she reaches in her pocket, and she really quickly, you know, she feeds these pigeons like crazy all over the place. And inevitably, here comes the attendant. You know, grabs her by the arm. Now, we told you, Mary, you are not to feed the pigeons. But she's got a wonderful, satisfied look on her face. As she walks away, you know, I've done it for today. Now, let's see what happens tomorrow, you know. In a very real sense, Papa was always considered crazy. You know, he planted this garden, and he used to, everything in gardens grow at once. You know, all the tomatoes, all the zucchini, everything he ever grew, all grew at once. Well, he was going to share it. And he'd go to people on the street and say, you know, you like some zucchini? And they were sure there was something, how much do you want for them? Nothing, they're yours, you know. And everyone looked upon him as really being strange, giving things away. That isn't the way it's done, you know. But Papa did it all the time. He never cheated on his income tax. Of course, he didn't have much income. And he was the only one that I know who used to insist every time the teacher came that she sit down and eat because she was so skinny. But he was considered to be crazy. But you know, St. Francis was considered to be crazy. Jesus of Nazareth was considered to be crazy. Buddha was considered to be crazy. George Bernard Shaw in his wonderful play, St. Joan, at the end of the play, after they've killed Joan, burned her at the stake, she comes back again and has a discourse with the audience. And the discourse ends with one of the most beautiful lines in literature. She says, "Oh God, when will the world be ready to accept its saints? Oh God, when?" Good question. Edward Blishen, talking about children, says, the world must be mastered, well enough at any rate for the child to be able to make its way through it as a reasonably competent human being. And to do this, there is a great deal to be known and a great balance to be sought. The balance between the inward person and the outward person, between the vast and awful possibilities of the imagination and the reality which is bearable simply because it is real. The adult represents to the child that this balance can be achieved. So, if we're cheating, if we're lying, if we're deceptive, if we're unloving, if we're prejudiced, if we're bitter, that's what we're modeling for our kids and for each other and for society, and that's why we're all so suspicious. You know, one of the things I do in my counseling classes at the university is I always gather them up and we go on a field trip to the general hospital. And we go to the psychiatric ward. And I say, look, you know, these are very young kids. And they're afraid, they're appalled. They don't understand that there are people, young people in their 16s and 17s and 18s and 20s and 30s, rocking, spending the rest of their lives rocking, staring into space, curled up in a little ball back in the fetal position, disappearing because the world has already become such a painful place for them. And then I take them to the ward where they have child abuse cases. And they find there's a little girl whose parents, because she reached for something she wasn't supposed to, actually chopped her hand off. Black and blue little children, one that was scalded in a bathtub. And of course this just builds and builds, and when we're through, it isn't just there. We go out and we sit together in the lawn, and I say to them, well, what do you think? You know, and of course they come off and they say, who are these terrible people that do things to people that make them fall into those states of despair and insanity? And I'm a brutal teacher. I say, we are. We are they. Because by not developing our capacity to love and by not demonstrating it, we're perpetuating that violence and that hate and that pain. If there's going to be a change, it's going to have to be done by us. We all know what needs to be done. Everybody in this audience could conceivably have a beautiful definition of what it means to be a lover. You know what it is. Why aren't we doing it? That's the question. What's the use of knowing something when you don't put it into action? You know, I had a Buddhist teacher once that said to me, to know and not to do is not really yet to know. You'll know that you're a lover when you begin to act at being a lover. And there is so much material to cover if you're going to be a lover. In fact, there's so much material, it reminds me of like a mosquito in a nudist colony. There's so much tempting stuff to talk about. But the first thing that we're going to have to do if we're going to decide we're going to be lovers is you're going to have to develop your sense of humor. Because, my goodness, people are going to treat you strangely, and you're going to have to learn how to accept it with a good laugh. Humor is a wonderful antidote to cruelty and to rejection and to distrust and to condescension. You know, the wonderful comedian Victor Borge says that the closest distance between two people is a good laugh. I love that. And you know, Mama taught us that early. She laughed all the time. It used to drive Papa crazy. He'd come home with all kinds of despairing things, and she'd get the giggles. And you know, there is nothing so contagious as laughter. Try it sometime. Just sit there and laugh, and pretty soon everyone around you, even though they know that they're laughing at, they're roaring with laughter. We were on the floor wondering what Mama was laughing at. She didn't know. It was just, the whole thing was just funny. You know, sometimes I think you have really become wise when you recognize that life is a great, big, wondrous joke, and you're at the center of it. You're the funniest thing of all. Have you ever watched... Have you ever watched human behavior? It's hysterical. You know, all during the summer I've been traveling all over the place, and like you know, I love to sit in airports and watch human behavior. Here's the family going on the much-needed holiday. You know, here's Mama, and here's Papa, and here are the 6 kids, and one is on a leash. And the others are all over the airport. And Papa's saying to Mama, get those kids together. The plane's about to leave. Where's Joe? He had to go to the toilet. Toilet! We're going to miss the flight. And the kids are saying, I don't want to go. And the other one's saying, when are we going to get there? I'm thirsty. Well, you can drink on the plane. I want something to drink now. Oh, they're having such a good time. You see Mama walk on the flight, you know, and she's had it. They haven't even taken off yet. I was recently at a concert. It was hilarious. And there was this man. He was determined to be the first one in the concert hall. Now, I can't explain why. But they opened the door, and there was this man pushing everybody aside with his poor wife on his arm. You know, she's pulling her through. And they get inside. Then he waits for an hour. You know, human behavior, if it weren't so marvelous, you know, we'd all just freak out. You know, St. Teresa of Avila had a wonderful philosophy. She said, no nun will be a part of our order unless she likes to sleep, she likes to eat, and she likes to laugh. I'd have been a good nun for her. Because she said, if you like to eat, you're usually healthy. If you sleep and you like to sleep, you usually have no big sins on your soul, you know. And if you love to laugh, you will always be saved. You know, for years and years and years, I was told, now, Buscaglia, you must be serious. You must plant your 2 feet firmly on the ground if you're ever going to get anywhere. Well, you know, with my feet firmly planted on the ground, I couldn't get my pants on. Flying in the air, I can get them on any time, in any position. Abraham Lincoln said, people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. Isn't that nice? You know, don't expect others to make you happy. You create the joy and watch what happens. You'll be the one that's dancing through life and laughing through life. It's such a nice place to be. And isn't it interesting that people certainly are happy in all kinds of situations we can't understand? There are poor people that are happy. There are ill people that are happy. There are disabled people that are seriously disabled that are happy. Even among the dying, I have known happy people, which tells us something we should all know, and that is, it isn't the situation that makes you happy. It's you that makes you happy. I was on a plane recently with a woman who had just lost her husband 2 weeks before, and she was going to visit her children. And she said some beautiful things to me. The two of us cried together. You should see me on airplanes. It's unbelievable. I have such an incredible time. It's such a nice, unique moment where we can share intimacy. And then you say goodbye, and you may never see each other again. But she told me about her life with her husband and about her kids and so on and so forth. Then she said, you know, Leo, the hardest time is at night. During the day, I'm busy. I don't think about it. But at night, when things are quiet and dark, and there's nobody to be near you, then you realize the import of bringing people close. And she said, especially after 35 years of having somebody close, just as far as a hand. And she said, you know, when I go back to my kids, I know they're going to try to make Mama happy. They're going to try to make her smile. My kids are sweet and they're wonderful, but they can't make me happy. Only I can make myself happy again. That got us to cry again. But how wonderful when you take full responsibility for your joy. Just about 2 weeks ago, I received a letter that I want to share with you. And this was from a woman, a very young woman, with a small family who found out at her very young age that she was dying of cancer. And she said the strangest thing happened when she was told, and she told her family. She said everybody rallied around her. All at once, her husband, who had never shown real affection, became very affectionate. Her kids hugged her and kissed her, and they relieved her of all kinds of mundane duties that she had to do all the time. And she said, then I found that I had a lot of free time to think about things. And the one thing that occurred to me was that I was living with a stranger. This is a quote. And the stranger was me. She says, what was I going to do? I was absolutely alone. And I said to the stranger inside of me, you know, we still have time left to get to know each other. So I started to deal with the things I think, and the things I choose, and the things I love, and the books I read. And I decided that these were the things that would get me to know me. And in so doing, Leo, I met a fantastic person. Me. The best thing I learned after knowing I had to give up everything was that all that I really had in the first place was what I was. And she ended her letter with this line: like I told you, I don't have long to live, but I've never been so happy and so alive. So if we're going to be lovers, we've got to take full responsibility for our lives. And you know, I understand that life is what you've been given. It's not always what you would want, but it's yours. And there it is. You know, certainly we're all created equal in the eyes of God. But you're naive if you think we're all created equal. Some of you are geniuses. Some people are mentally retarded. Some of you are absolutely, according to our standards, ravishingly beautiful. Some are ravishingly plain. You know, some of you are big-boned, and some of you are little-boned. And if you're big-boned, there isn't much you can do about it. You know, you could do Jane Fonda's workout until you turn purple. You're still going to have big hips. I remember as a kid, I was really tall and really skinny. It didn't matter that Mama fed me and fed me and fed me. I was really skinny. I grew very fast. And I envied all of my friends that really had rippling muscles and were the big macho kind, you know. And I'd see them in gym, and I felt so really ashamed of this skinny little body. And it was because it was like this, you know. and I was trying to find ways of helping myself. And at that time, the big popular thing, which was Charles Atlas. Remember Charles Atlas? And they used to have that little cartoon that showed the little skinny one with whom I identified right down the line. And this big guy was throwing sand on his girlfriend. And then it says, 30 days later, and here's this huge guy, and the guy throws sand, and watch out. You know, and I thought, that's for Buscaglia. And so I saved all my pennies. You know, at that time I was selling, it ages me, but Liberty magazine doesn't even exist anymore. Saturday Evening Post with a little thing like this. Oh, it was wonderful, door to door. At that time, you know, wasn't on the stand. You'd knock on the, did I learn about behavior? You know, I had to learn fast. But I learned that there were good things, there were bad things. You know, that was all good. But I remember I took all my savings and I sent for Charles Atlas, you know, his program. And it came in a brown envelope. They promised you that. You know, and I remember going in my room and opening it up and pulling it out, and I was amazed. You know, here was Charles in all of his majestic glory. And it said, now this is what you have to do. And it was called, I even remember, it was called dynamic tension. Do you know I dynamic tensioned myself practically into a hospital? I was still never chosen for the baseball team. I was still skinny. So there are some things that we just have to accept. That's the way it is. That's the way it was given. You know, another thing I couldn't do anything about and didn't want to, but as a kid it was a problem, is that I was an Italian and I was so different. I was brought up in a totally different society. All of my friends ate hamburgers. They'd say, what did you have? I'd say, I had the risotto. You had what? Risotto. What else did you have? I had polenta. Polenta. I never heard of polenta. What's polenta? You know, I remember I used to go to school with my little brown bag and everybody had ham and, you know, cheese and everything. And I had calamari. And I had this little sandwich with all these creepy crawlies going. I loved it. They'd say, what's that? You know, I'd say it's octopus. Octopus! Buscaglia eats octopus. You know, we all had to put up with that. They didn't know. It was good. I love it. It's passion. And at Christmas time, you know, we never had Santa Claus. We had the Christmas angel. And the Christmas angel always brought chestnuts. You know, people say, what did you get for Christmas? Chestnuts. Chestnuts! What kind of a thing is that to bring you? I don't know.